Y'all ready for this?
Welcome to the L Cubed YouTube College Life Influencer Show, where we find YouTubers you're going to love and clip out the best advice that can help you graduate on time with a GPA you can feel good about. Do you feel like you study for hours on end to the point of exhaustion, only to be disappointed with the results? Do you wish you could have more time for your friends and still get good grades? On today's episode, we're going to get advice on how to study less, play more, and still get the A. This can be done using something called spaced repetition. It's time to find out who we have on our panel of experts today. First up, we have Mike and Maddie. Let's check in to see what they have to say about studying and spaced repetition.
If you're students like us, we want you to ponder this question. How many years of your life have been spent studying? How many total hours have you spent sitting in front of a computer or textbook, desperately trying to absorb information? If you look at it that way, then the goal isn't actually about finding more time to study. It's about finding more efficiency.
When it comes to studying, we found that there are 3 incredibly important strategies that you must make use of. These are active recall, spaced repetition, and proper organization.
Thanks, Mike and Maddie. Next up is our favorite college info geek, Thomas Frank. He always has great advice. Let's see what he has to say about studying and spaced repetition.
I think we can all agree that studying takes far too much time. So what I want to do in this video is show you guys how you can remember more of what you learn, even if you're spending fewer actual hours studying. And the way to do that is by spacing out that study time. This is a technique called spaced repetition, and to do it, you add progressively longer and longer time intervals in between each of your study sessions.
Thanks, Thomas. One of our favorites from London, Liam Porritt, has quite a lot to share about spaced repetition. Let's listen in.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, I'm Liam, a Cambridge graduate and current London law student. And in this video, I'm going to be telling you how to take what you read and study in these things and put it in here as efficiently as possible using spaced repetition. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll struggle to remember what you had for lunch today, never mind anything else. And so you'll definitely know that feeling of walking out of a lesson being like, yeah, I understood that. Reading something, it's in here, I've got it, I understood it, it's all good. Then you go to do your homework or an essay or an assignment, or maybe even to study for an exam, and you're like, no, don't think I've ever looked at this before. It feels like even though you study for just as long as other people, or maybe even longer than other people, you just don't seem to retain the information in the same way. Well, that can be explained by science, and particularly by the science of the way connections are formed within the brain. Now, not all connections are created equal, some are stronger than others. And in this video, we're basically going to show you how you can form the strongest, longest lasting connections to make sure that you learn as efficiently as possible and that stuff stays in your brain. Somewhat obviously, over time, the brain just forgets information. Now, this is where what is called the Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting comes in, and you might have heard of this before.
What is the forgetting curve? Roll back to 1885, and Hermann Ebbinghaus was in the prime of his life. His beard had blossomed into a fantastic set of bristles, and he was busy pioneering an experimental study of memory. His rigorous research method needed only one subject: himself. Hermann got to work testing his memory and plotting the results. His findings showed just how rapidly information seeps out of our brains. Within a month, Hermann had forgotten 90% of everything he'd originally learned. His findings have since been backed up by neuroscientists. Our brains operate a strict use it or lose it policy when it comes to information they store. In a training context, this is hugely counterproductive. If training is going to drive behaviour change, then it needs to stick inside your learners' brains. To make information sticky, it needs to be regularly reinforced. Retaining learning is like watering a plant. If you don't repeat the act regularly, you might lose it entirely. But if you look after it, it'll grow strong roots and stick around forever.
The first technique is to delay your review until the end of your study session. So most people, when they're studying something, will skim read maybe, but usually just read something through for the first time, try and understand it simultaneously, try and make notes simultaneously, and then maybe once they've read like a paragraph or a section of information about something, they'll quickly go over it and then move on. And then they'll repeat that process over and over again. What I'm proposing is, again, that we build circles within our study session. So I'd recommend that if you're reading material, for example, the first thing you do is that you skim read through the whole of the material. That means reading titles, reading the first sentences, getting the general gist of what everything is about and an order to that. Then once you've done that, you want to go through and read the notes, and also if you're watching a lecture, for example, watch the whole lecture through and make notes on it as you do so. But I don't want you to stick on any point for ages and rewatch a particular point and rewatch a particular point, or re-go over a particular paragraph over and over again at the start. It's only once you've then been through all of it once, we then cycle again and we go over in particular detail anything we found particularly difficult. And then cycle 4, we come through and we review the whole thing. Usually in my head I'll do this. I'll just kind of say, right, okay, this topic, for example, in chemistry I just covered states of matter. Let's go through states of matter. Let's talk to myself through what the properties of a solid, liquid, gas are. Already in one study session we've built in 4 cycles, where normally most people would only have 1. The next technique to mention is the end of the day recall. Now, most of us, when we get to the end of the day studying, like we finish our last assignment, close the book and get out of the library or get out of the room as quickly as we possibly can. It seems logical that like as soon as you finish, you want to just escape, get away from it. But the reality is that actually if you spent an extra 5 to 10 minutes just going over everything you'd studied that day, you would then save yourself much more time in the long run. So how can you do that practically? One, you can just talk to yourself, explain to yourself, for example, like let's say, go back to the chemistry example, states of matter. I've covered solids, liquids and gases, and I might just run through the key words. For example, solid, vibrate about a fixed point, liquids, slip and slide particles over one another, gases, high energized particles that move freely around a space. Something like that, you know, those key buzzwords, that's it, move on. Or I might choose to use one of the active recall techniques that for me has been like a game changer, and I know loads of you love it from my active recall video. Check that out if you haven't already. It's called the brain splurge, and basically that means going through a topic and just writing down everything about that you can remember from the day. So that would be big titles, and for example, like I do this for law quite a bit, I'll just jot down all of the main cases at the end of the day that I've covered, and I just find that really helps with memorizing cases, because otherwise I find that the cases really just don't go in my head at all from just reading and making notes. The other thing I particularly recommend with the brain splurge is that if you get something wrong, or there's a piece of information that you're like, I know there's something here, but I just can't quite remember it, quickly look at your notes, just highlight it in the brain splurge that you've done, write it in red, and then just kind of take a particular like mental image of that. And hopefully that piece of information will now stick in your brain that much kind of more firmly than it otherwise would if you just kind of been like, I can't quite remember that, meh, move on, let's leave. Next up, we have to do homework questions in your head from memory. What? I did this for law this year and it was really, really productive. Every single problem question, like every single bit of the question, I would go through that question in my head, trying to think of the cases I would use. Like, I'm not writing a full answer to that question in my head. I'm not saying that. I would go through the question and be like, right, I know I need that case. What was that case that I need? Okay, that's a piece of information that like I really need to make sure I try and memorize that when I go through this properly. Yeah, I get that. I know the process. Ooh, I can't remember what I do here. This bit of this question I'm going to struggle with. I can tell that already. I need to make sure I do that particularly like carefully. What you're doing there is that you're telling your brain, right, these things I'm happy with, bam, bam, bam. These bits, however, I'm much less happy with. I need to make sure I go over those, make sure they're fully locked into my memory so that next time I do a question like this, everything comes to me like that. But yeah, do the homework properly, but first of all, make sure you try and do it in your head and find out the areas that you know you're going to find difficult and pay particular attention to those. My final tip is really kind of linked to the previous tip. It's to not do homework or assignments too far in advance of the class when you're going to be going through that homework or assignment. And that piece of work should be done pretty much in the middle between first viewing, like whether that's first class, lecture, or just going over notes, and then when you actually go through that essay or piece of work in some kind of tutorial. The crucial thing here is that I know so many people who are like, I'm going to be super productive this year, I'm going to smash my homework, I'm going to do it the first day I get it, and it's going to be done a week ahead of time. The problem with that, and like I had this in law class throughout this year, those people would then turn up to the class where we'd be going through that assignment, and they wouldn't even be able to remember what happened in the problem question. And so they would sit there throughout like a whole class having no idea what was going on. And I, who had done it like maybe 1 or 2 days, sometimes on the day, not ideal, but it happens. And I actually think that doing it on the very morning of the class, like fairly rushed, was more productive than having done it really well a week earlier. Be prepared and do things in advance, ideally like in the middle between first class and going through the assignment, but really don't do it too far ahead of the date when you're going to be going through it, because otherwise you'll have forgotten it all and you just won't engage fully in the class and you won't get the full benefit of that class.
Thanks, Liam. That all makes perfect sense. But why should I change when my cramming methods seem to be working just fine?
So to quickly finish this video, I want to make one final point, which is that even if you consider yourself to be a crammer, even if you think like, yeah, I don't want to learn this over the long term, I don't want to keep this in my mind for a long time, I just want to get through these exams and move on and forget it the next day, I don't care. Even if you think that spaced repetition still has a crucial role to play in your revision, because of the importance of building those cycles, those circles, into the way you're studying. Make sure you're building those cycles into every single part of your studying, from the very first moment you read content through to when you're preparing for exams. So start getting used to reviewing what you've studied at the end of each study session, just going quickly mentally, explaining to yourself exactly kind of, I remember this, just for 2 minutes at the end of a study session, just to get that first repetition in. Then again, at the end of the day, maybe use the brain splurge to cover everything you've gone over in that day quickly, titles, keywords, bullet points, target any areas that you're really struggling to remember. Then, as far as homework is concerned, try and make sure that you're doing your homework right in the middle of the first time you cover the content and the review session, the tutorial, class, seminar, when you're going to go through that homework. And remember, try to do the homework, if you can, in your head.
Wow, great advice from our panelists today. Now you know how to incorporate this spaced repetition technique into your study routine. And if you're not ready for a complete change, you can start by choosing one part of the technique to try now and adding more later. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.